Please join me in welcoming our 3 new board members. Thank you. So, before you in the packet that was distributed is a set of minutes, and I would ask for a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Minutes are approved. The next item is an update on the September 9th, 2014 variance. And as you recall, there was a federal statute that PREA, which required that 16 and 17-year-olds needed to be housed together. Hence, the Department of Corrections reached out to us for a variance at our last board meeting, requesting that we approve a housing cohort for 18 to 21-year-olds. We approved that, and we only continued it until this board meeting. And we raised at the meeting, and subsequently in a letter that I sent to Commissioner Pond, Commissioner of the Department of Corrections, a number of issues regarding cameras, programming, safety crisis management training for staff, as well as the appropriate ratio. And there's a letter that wasn't in your board book that's in the materials that were distributed today from the Commissioner. And with that, I'd like to turn to the Commissioner. Commissioner Pond?
Thank you, Gordon. We'll have several staff report out. Jim Durenda will report on the camera situation.
Hey, good morning, everybody.
And by the way, welcome.
Yeah, thank you. I started about the first week in October, just so if you know who I am. I was retired from Department of Correction in Connecticut after doing 27 years. I was currently the commissioner for all the jails, prisons, and parole in Connecticut. So I'm trying to put my arms around some of the issues that are happening around the city, and hopefully I'll be able to support the needs of what the department and the board is looking for. Right now with the camera system, we first looked at RNDC to make sure that the majority of the areas in the facility that may be vulnerable for issues of violence would be covered by some type of a camera system that would record and be able to be utilized not only for prevention but also for intelligence after incidents occurred. When I looked at the blueprints and saw that all the areas I'm comfortable with will be covered as soon as the entire installation is done, we're looking at probably closer to about 1,250 cameras to cover that entire facility. So looking at that, if I'm comfortable with that, I could almost, by ratio, determine the other facilities around the Department of Correction, determine what we would like to see cover those areas in a ratio compared to how many inmates RNDC has, which is would be able to hold by beds 1,550 offenders. So doing the ratio, determine that when all is said and done, if we've covered all the areas and all the facilities, we should be looking for about 10,515 cameras actually to cover the facilities around the department. So we currently have funded 3,000 additional cameras to complete the first phase. We are currently looking for funding for 4,811 additional cameras that will give us the 10,515 that I mentioned. Currently, as of today, we have 2,703 cameras actually installed and in operation.
Thank you.
I'd just like to add the city has committed to fund the additional cameras, so we'll be issuing an RFP to do that, and we hope to, once the award has occurred, that we'll have all camera coverage in all our facilities within 18 months of the award.
Gordon, let me ask questions on
Yeah, I just looked exactly about it. Are you on cameras?
Yeah.
Sure. Absolutely.
Good morning. As you all know, I'm the chair of the Adolescent Committee. We're very well aware of the Department of Justice report regarding 16, 17, and 18-year-olds, the Board of Correction, and the Department of Justice calling for cameras where the 18-year-olds are housed. It's my understanding that all of the housing units where the 18-year-olds are being held do not have any video cameras except for one. Is there a reason that's the case and those units are not being prioritized in light of the constitutional violations found by the Department of Justice?
Well, like I was mentioning, RNDC will be covered first. That was our main priority. But the 18-year-old units that are out there will be covered. And it is all these are priorities because it's going across the system. But we did look at the 18-year-old units. They are going to be covered. We're hoping that it'll be quicker than later. Then that's why we're looking at trying to install these as soon as possible, getting the RFP out as fast as possible to be able to get the project rolling. And I'm hoping that within 18 months we won't have to discuss this anymore. Everywhere, every unit should have a camera. I know that.
And Commissioner, there were a number of other issues that we raised in the letter. So if you could address, one was the training and what the status of that is.
Good morning, everyone. Lynette Saunders. So, as discussed at our last meeting, the department plans to develop a trauma-informed care environment. As a result, the department has integrated the Safe Crisis Management curriculum into its academy's portfolio. As a result, we began training September 2014. By the end of December, we would have had 250 staff members trained in safe crisis management. Currently, there are 110 individuals who have been trained, and 30% of those are individuals who work in adolescent and young adult housing areas.
Thank you. And then the other issue was was programming.
Sure, I can also add additional information on that. So part of the programming is we plan to integrate reentry service, a comprehensive discharge planning continuum for both the adolescent and the young adults. We also plan to integrate career and technical educational programming, as well as workforce development. A lot of the programming is contingent on funding, which is going to be a little bit under, I believe, $5 million, and we've already requested that. So we're awaiting determination if that will be granted.
And Commissioner, what's your sense of funding of the programming?
There are a couple revenue sources that we've talked about. I know Liz Laser Shop had some revenue sources, so we're really fine-tuning the request, and either it will be a request directly to the city or a request for other funding options that others have.
Anything we can do to be helpful. And then the last issue that I want to turn to the board for questions was the staffing ratio, because that's something that was also in my letter. It's a concern of the board. Because my understanding is 16 and 17-year-olds is a 1 to 15. The question is that needed from your perspective?
So we've discussed adding other types of staff to the units, not a 1 to 15 ratio. That would be cost prohibitive at this time. And for us, I think the programming piece is going to be fundamentally how we move forward. The ratio would be very difficult for us to achieve at this time.
Okay, Judge Hamill?
Yes. When the board considered the variance, there was a letter granting the variance that had a number of conditions for that variance. Based upon our acting executive director's opinion, those conditions have not been met. Part of what I was saying is that when the board granted and issued the variance for 2 months, there were a number of conditions that variance was premised upon. According to our acting executive director, Amanda Masters, those conditions have not been met. Reading from the letter in which the variance was granted, additionally, the board will carefully monitor whether a C officer is needed in the young adult housing areas in order to provide inmates with enhanced supervision. The department will prepare a report analyzing this issue for the November 18, 2014 board meeting. Has your department, in fact, prepared a report for our consideration?
At this point, we have not moved the inmates. The conditions that were imposed by the board in the variance were unachievable, and so the inmates are still in their current housing situations. They have not been moved.
Okay, so in other words,
we wouldn't be able to report on it because we haven't done that yet.
But in other words, you're not relying in any way upon the variance then, because there has not been a commingling of the 18 with the 19 to 20 and 21-year-olds. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Now, with respect to enhanced housing, given the fact that the 18-year-olds are absolutely included in the Department of Justice's investigation and report and recommendations, and I will say when I last toured, and I've been touring these facilities regularly, your own correction officers are informing me they feel unsafe in the 18-year-old housing because of the amount of inmates there and the very few correction officers there. Is there a reason, in light of your own staff, that you wouldn't add at least enhance the supervision for where the 18-year-olds are being held separately?
Difficult to me to respond to a conversation I wasn't part of, Your Honor. So, you know, I'd be more than happy to have that conversation with our staff. But, you know, some of the changes are fairly new. The staffing numbers, meaning staff to inmates, are pretty traditional. So those are the size of the cell blocks and the traditional staffing plan that's always been there.
I want to just recognize that our acting executive director, Amanda Masters, joined us, and she cut her hand and could not stop the bleeding. So if anyone had that situation before, and I just want to add, follow up with, because there was, Amanda, you had put in a memo in our board book about concerns. Then subsequently, there's a November 15th letter. So just to get your thoughts based on what you put in the board book vis-a-vis the letter.
It does provide a lot more detail about the training that has been undertaken.
Dr. Cohen?
Yeah. When I visited GMDC and GRBC, which are the two dorms where the 18-year-olds are going to be mixed with the 19 to 21-year-olds, I was told and spoke with both of the wardens in those facilities. One of them, Warden Campy, is no longer in GRBC, but they both told me that they could not staff these facilities safely with the young adolescents without having a C officer present. And it may be cost prohibitive, although I don't know that it's cost prohibitive. I know that currently the situation is quite problematic. And I would further say that since the department asked us for variance, has not used the variance, does not have in place now a plan which meets the jointly agreed to variance letter. I mean, this was not something that the board said you have to do and you said we can't do. This was a letter that the board negotiated with the department, that these were the things that you were going to do in order to create the young adult unit. I would suggest that you pull this right now, and when you're ready to do it, bring it back to the board.
Okay, so I disagree that it was negotiated. There were things put in the variance that we did not agree to. And so while we move this forward, there is a need for us to, in order to be effective in our programming, is to mix these populations.
What are those items? What are the items that you do not agree with?
Oh, conditions on commingling this group. So this was not agreed to prior at the variance. That was added to the variance after the meeting.
What are the elements in that letter?
Not to get specific on that, but the issue was that we didn't sit down and come to an agreement on we could do these things, because we knew some of these things would be virtually impossible for us to accomplish.
Can I ask the staff to comment on that?
I can say that I'm not sure if anyone can hear me. That in preparation.
Can't hear you.
Sorry, and again, getting this over. There was an extensive conversation between Deputy Commissioner Eric Berliner and myself about each one of those conditions, and it was represented to me that they were indeed the plan the department had, and that there would not be a problem in complying with that.
Commissioner, can I ask a question? Because as Judge Hamel said, to date you have not commingled the 18 to 21-year-olds. What's your sense of when you're planning to, when you would like to be able to do that?
We'd like to do it immediately. A lot of our programming assumptions in terms of being able to provide everybody with the programming are based on the need to put the 19, 20, 21-year-olds in the same housing areas as the 18-year-olds. I think you heard Commissioner Saunders earlier talk about the expedited training that we've done. One of the things that Ms. Masters and I discussed was that board's conditions on training, for example, the board's conditions on training were going to be hard for us to achieve by the time that you all set forth in the letter. We certainly have committed to doing that training for everybody and have expedited so that we will get more officers trained by the end of this calendar year.
Judge Howard?
Since there's real progress being made at RNDC, and these 18-year-olds were moved out of RNDC and put in GMDC and GRBC, where GRBC is regularly being locked down. Since there's additional training of the staff in RNDC, and the 18-year-olds, based on the Department of Justice's investigation and report, have suffered constitutional right violations while incarcerated, is there a reason you would not move the 18-year-olds back to RNDC, where the staff have been trained and there is some additional program, notwithstanding the fact that under PREA and state law, they can't be commingled in housing?
Excuse me, ma'am, I just wanted to clarify. People in GRVC, GMDC, Rosensinger, OBCC have been trained as well, not just RNDC.
Okay.
Other questions? So there's a consideration before the board of continuing the 18 to 21-year-old variance, and I would ask if the board, in terms of consideration, would want the same conditions or additional conditions, or not, defer not to take action. Judge Hamilton? I
would move to table. We are in the midst of rulemaking. Our rulemaking is including a new housing cohort of 18 to 21-year-old. The commissioner and his staff have made it clear it's going to take time to implement the conditions that, in my opinion, would make it safe for the 18-year-olds to be mixed with the 21-year-olds. So I would move to table.
Second.
So there's a motion to table the variance to our to an upcoming meeting. There was a motion and a second by Dr. Cohen. All in favor of tabling the motion? The motion for the continuation of the 18 to 21-year-old variance is tabled to our next board meeting. The next item on the agenda is a rule that's before the board today, and I just want to speak by way of background. As the board knows, the Department of Corrections submitted to the Board of Correction a request for a variance for an Enhanced Housing Supervised Unit, or EHSU. A number of board members felt strongly that a public hearing was warranted if we considered it as a variance. In addition, some board members thought the variance request should be considered through the CAPA rulemaking process. And I might add that we heard from many stakeholders that made exactly the same point, that we should proceed with the CAPA process as opposed to a variance. Therefore, I submitted the question on behalf of the board to Corporation Counsel, and after careful review, the Corporation Counsel advised that the best course of action for consideration of the Enhanced Supervision Housing Unit was through the CAPA process. Hence, the attached rule, which was drafted by Corporation Counsel from the Department of Corrections, which emanated from the EHSU variance request, is attached for review. It encompasses not only provisions relating to the EHSU, but also addresses owed time and punitive segregation, which have been long-standing issues before this board. Assuming the board votes to place the proposed rule into the CAPA process, there will be opportunity for the public and interested stakeholders to submit written comment, as well as a public hearing at the end of the 30-day notice period. If the board proceeds to adopt and place this rule into CAPA, the board is adopting the provisions of the rule. The whole concept behind CAPA is to hear from interested stakeholders during a 30-day period when there's a notice in the city record, and we would definitely entertain, assuming it's adopted by the board and placed into CAPA, written comments. And in addition, at the end of the 30-day notice period, there would be a public hearing where we would entertain testimony from interested stakeholders, and obviously there would be board deliberation as it relates to the rule that's going through the CAPA process. And obviously there will be a number of issues that we need to consider during this process, and issues that I actually discussed as recently as yesterday with both Commissioner Bassett and with Commissioner Pont in terms of, for example, what the definitional mental health should be in terms of exclusion, and also in terms of medical conditions. But we really would like to get the best thinking from the two departments on that point. Another issue of concern to the board that we're going to want to spend time grappling with is the appropriate screening mechanism, as well as the appropriateness of the various restrictions that are built into the proposed rule, a review of the procedural process for placement in and exit from the Enhanced Housing Supervision Unit, and there is the elimination of owed time, as well as reducing punitive segregation from 90 to 30 days. One of the things that the board is going to want to consider, and then you're back out for 7 days, is how many 30-day periods could occur in a 90-day or 6-month period. So these are just some of the questions that we would want to consider as we proceed. By proceeding with the rule now, we'll expedite the placement and the elimination of owed time and the significant reduction of punitive segregation from 90 to 30 days. And I know that the department has a presentation on this particular rule that's before us, proposed rule. Commissioner Pont?
Thank you. We have some slides we'll go through fairly quickly. In these slides, we'll do a quick overview of the agency, the violence over time, shows where the indicators are. Violence by categories, the drivers of the violence, the tools for dealing with our most violent population, and then we'll talk a little bit about the enhanced supervision model. So the Department of Corrections overview, as you see on the slides here, it just talks about the number of facilities. 85% of our population is pre-trial, and we have nine jails on island and 4 in the boroughs, 2 hospital wards. The mission for us in FY14 is 77,000, 56,000 unduplicated, daily population about 11,000. Average length of stay is 53 days. Percent released to the community, 76% of our inmates go back to the community. Average age is 35. Adolescent population is about 5% of our ADP, and our female population, that's 7%. Daily, we have about 5,200 uniformed staff members at work. 1,000 inmates are moved to courts every day. Transportation travels over 3,000 miles daily to move our inmates. Serving 44,000 meals a day and 1,600 visits per day visit the island. So this is the violence over time. So as you see, we've overlaid at the top of the chart the commissioners that were here during those time frames. The bottom piece, the aligned bar, is obviously a change in how we reported. So that's why you'll see how it jumps up like that. The different definitions that were added to our reporting. But since the end of Marty Hahn's term, so that's 2009, thereabout, through Doris Shuro's term and continuing, the violence has been really unabated. So everything that's been tried, and people have tried, has had very little or no impact on the violence at Rikers Island.
Is this all violence, Commissioner? All violence?
All violence, yes. You can go back to that slide. So it's just that we took different, we can break down much smaller than this, but this is use of force, stabbings and slashings, and then the injury to inmates, bites and assaults, serious injury to inmates. And there's other categories, so these are the main categories where there's the most increase. Okay, next slide. So we looked at 2010, 2014, and just kind of to give some sense on where we've gone since 2010. As you can see, we've increased stabbings and slashings by 159%, assaults on our uniformed staff by 50%, more than half, assaults on healthcare staff by 1,500%, assaults on civilian staff has stayed static, and then total assaults has increased by 58%. This is just a breakdown of the population because, as everyone knows, our jail population has been reduced, but the types of inmates that we're holding, the more violent felonies and mentally ill inmates, as percentage-wise, has increased as a percentage of the population. These are the subgroups. So these are the groups that we look at that are driving most of the violence. So in proportion, our high custody inmates, which are 16% of our population, drive about 61% of the violent incidents. Gang involvement, SRGs, 10% of the population drive about 25% of the incidents. And mental health, those inmates with a MO designation, 30% of the population drive about 59% of the incidents. And then adolescents at 66% drive 26%. And that is, again, for us, adolescents in this category was when 18-year-olds were included. So we looked at the incidents, and we looked at those that were repeated, so where the same inmates are repeating the types of events. Looking at stabbing and slashing for FY14, 10 offenders were involved in multi-incidents, 11%. Use of force, 2,700 of the inmates were involved in more than one use of force. Out of the 3,000 that were occurred, 71%. And then the serious inmate fights and assaults at 157, 8 inmates were repeatedly involved in those. The assaults on staff, again, 752, 267 inmates were repeatedly involved in assaults on staff. So our thoughts on enhanced supervision is that if these inmates, rather than being loose in population, were in a enhanced supervision model, we could have avoided as many as nearly 3,000 incidents in FY14 alone. This is the breakdown of kind of what we currently look like in primitive seg, which is a 23-hour a day lockdown. Services occur in the unit, one inmate out of a time. All activities basically are a single inmate alone, and 23 hours a day lockdown. In the enhanced supervision model, we're up to 17 hours a day of lock-in, about 7 hours a day out of cell time, mixing in small groups, outdoor rec in small groups, half the inmates in the unit out at a time, which gives us, I believe, about 24, last recall. And then included in the 17 hours of lock-in time, all services would be delivered to the unit. Up on the top right, where it says standard housing units, it talks about the different types of units that currently are available to us, from general pop, enhanced restraint, protective custody, mental observation, administrative seg, and clinical alternative to punitive seg. Those units, while they have different titles on them, they do not operate substantially different than a normal housing unit. There are a few restrictions, but not many.
Commissioner, what is administrative segregation?
It's a title we put on inmates. I'll have the chief kind of talk in a little more detail about that, but it is not what you would typically think of administrative segregation in prisons and jails. So.
Good morning. So administrative segregation, as far as New York City Department of Correction is concerned, is just an inmate identified by the facility that may have been involved in a violent incident, or somebody that they want to closely monitor, put into a housing area which is very similar to general population. The only exception is that when that inmate leaves the housing unit, he is or she is escorted to and from. Other than that, there is no difference between admin seg and general population.
Just typically, how many people do you have in that?
I believe 94, department-wide.
I have a question as well on the units. What about your maximum custody units? I've had an opportunity to tour at the Manhattan House of Detention and the Brooklyn House of Detention, where they're essentially locked in one cell and can come out to an area that's barred, right, but only any contact with the next inmate. Who is placed into that unit?
Those are inmates who are identified as being involved in violent incidents, usually stabbings and slashings or serious assaults on staff, and they cannot commingle with many others. So there may be 1 or 2 inmates that can commingle together, so they're placed in a cubicle side by side. But for the most part, those inmates would not do well in general population.
And what about the unit that used to be located, I don't know if it's still there, in the West facility, and the units that were built as isolation units, where you have inmates that are essentially locked in a cell with a little anteroom, and if they're allowed to come out, they're locked into another cell without a bed with 4 inmates. What kind of unit is that?
That was replaced once the North Infirmary Command main building opened up. We created that unit when NIC was closed for renovation. So once NIC, Nick Main opened up again, we took those inmates out of the West facility and they went to NIC.
And how many beds do you have available in that?
In NIC, there's 84 cell beds, but not all of them have those individual cubicles. There's only 4 tiers that have those cubicles built.
And what are the criteria for placement in that unit?
It's the same as I just described for the previous, those inmates who have been involved in serious incidents, serious assaults on staff, stabbings, or slashings.
So there's additional housing units to what's up?
Well, they're there. It's the second one down. It says enhanced restraint. That's what NIC, Nick Main, or Manhattan 9 South is considered.
Yes, sir. How many are in MO now on any one day?
Eric?
800.
I visited the Manhattan House last week, and I visited this unit where men are housed for the same criteria I believe that you're proposing for the enhanced restraints. They, like the men in CPSU, don't have access to programs. I met with the medical staff who said that these prisoners cannot get to Bellevue repeatedly, month after month, because there are no escorts available to get them to medical clinic. And as the board report demonstrated in our review of CPSU, prisoners in CPSU rarely, that's less than 10%, got to recreation. Similarly, the people should be aware that the prisoners in these units who are not been infracted, but are under enhanced, these units have recreation if they get it in individual cells. Without being allowed to talk to other people when they're recreating, not in the yard. They're in little cages where they exercise.
If I could just say that inmates can talk to one another when they're in recreation. They may be in an individual recreation area, but those areas are outside. It's a mesh area, and they have sight and sound communication with the person in the next.
I was told by the officer in charge that they were not allowed to.
I'm telling you from experience and being there that those inmates can, with sight and sound communication with the person in the next rec area.
We'll get a couple more slides.
Good, thank you.
Okay. All right. So again, the case for enhanced supervision, the increased restriction on violent inmates is necessary to keep staff and inmates safe in our jails. We have a duty to protect. We can't sit back and allow this escalating violence year after year without putting something in place to stop it and keep our staff and inmates safe. It's not punitive seg, as board members have indicated. All inmates are out of their cells 7 hours a day, and they have access to all programming which will come to the house for delivery. And there would be no reductions in services to those with mental illness. And as Gordon pointed out, we're working on that definition with Commissioner Bassett. On this slide here, it's kind of just to give you an overview of the system as I found it. So, inmate disciplinary system is meant to control behavior or improve behavior. So when I arrived here, we had 1,000 inmates on the waiting list waiting to go to punitive seg. That made the inmate disciplinary system basically unworkable. So, and that had been that case for how many years? Several years, that it's just never could function at the capacity it needed to. So, without pointing fingers, it's an issue that the system did not work and will not work under the current mandates. There are no options, so either an officer could write an inmate up, he could be sentenced to punitive seg, or not. There's nothing in between. Historical time, inmates when released, coming back, owing hundreds of days of seg time. I think there's about 600, 500 on the list, 400 on the list that owed time coming back into our custody. And the amount of seg time we could get charged per infraction is 90 days. So it's currently 90 days under the current system. Adolescents in our system were serving hundreds of days of time in punitive seg. And we had more than 60 adolescents in segregation up until a few months back. Our CATS unit, which has been very effective, for those inmates that were put here for infractions. So they weren't the treatment of inmates prior to an incident, they were the treatment of inmates after the incident. And with all these pieces in place, violence continued to rise at substantial numbers. So this system functionally just does not work to keep our staff and inmates safe. So we've asked in our request to look at holistically at how we manage inmates and how we apply discipline. So we've agreed to eliminate punitive SEG, as we've said here before, for all adolescent inmates by the end of the year. Chief Perino is sitting over here in our audience. He's the main lead on that, and along with Ms. Saunders. We're looking at capping. We will cap the punishment, meaning the amount of SEG time per infraction, at 30 days rather than the current 90. We will eliminate all O time being that if you were discharged from custody and came back into custody, you would not owe time in punitive segregation. We're creating a punitive seg light, so even in the new model, that if you get a charge or an infraction, then there's options that were never available to staff before. So you could go to regular segregation, you could go to a segregation that's out 7 hours a day, or for the lower charges, the grade 3, that you would not go to segregation at all. So there are other options in the model that we currently don't have. And we would eliminate the backlog of all of our cases. So the system basically would work as designed rather than continuing to writing reports and inmates sitting in our populations with no place to go. It will allow us the space to put our real dangerous inmates quickly, get them out of population. Enhanced housing allows us continuation of the enhanced supervision for those inmates that are truly dangerous in our population. But we think this model that we're asking the board to support is much more progressive and realistic to the current model that we're struggling with today. And again, lastly, as we looked at the inmates that are causing the rule violations, at 10% of our population, only 6% commit violent infractions, and the enhanced supervision covers about 250 beds, or about 2.2% of our average daily population. And again, we have the categories listed as to who would be eligible and how they would get there in this housing unit. Again, we're not trying to impose sanctions on inmates. We're trying to run safe, humane correctional facilities. ESH will give us the opportunity to do that. We're committed, along with our union's leadership, to making sure that our facilities are safe. Without safety, nothing else works. If we can't keep our staff and inmates safe, all the programming in the world will not work. Safety has to be the #1 priority, and we have to be committed to keeping our facility safe.
Thank you, Commissioner. And Amanda just reminded me, I don't want to refer to the board, in tab 6 of your board book, there's a violence trend report. The first page is on our website. I asked Amanda subsequently to put the additional reports, because consistent with what the Commissioner is saying, it shows that even with the decrease in population, there's an increase in terms of use of force and slashings and stabbing. So with that, let me open it up for discussion.
I have some questions. Commissioner, the announced reforms that you just stated, in fact, are reforms that you've been talking to the Board of Correction for implementing for some time. As early as April, when you asked in meetings with the rulemaking chairs to be able to implement the reforms to show that you can reduce punitive segregation. Is there a reason, given the fact that there's more than 500 inmates in punitive seg, and according to your violation letter to the state commissioner, you have over 1,000 waiting to go into punitive seg. Is there a reason you don't implement some of those own reforms now, ending punitive seg for own time, ending punitive seg for adolescents, especially in light of the fact that these wouldn't be the dangerous inmates that need to go into the enhanced supervision units?
So, one, I didn't make any comments on reforms in April. I arrived here in April, so that's way too early in the calendar for me to be talking about reforms. The reforms that we did indicate we would do are well in process. We are, I think we have about 20 adolescents still in punitive seg.
11 in PSU.
Which is down from about 60 plus. So we've begun the process on the things that we said we were going to do. We're well along the way. We will be a leader, national leader amongst jails in the country in our elimination of punitive seg for adolescents. These other pieces, historic time and these other pieces, without the ability to separate violent inmates from population, we're hesitant to do other things until those things happen. So, it's not about reducing punitive seg or reducing number of punitive seg beds. We need to have safe facilities. Once we have safe facilities, then we can have a pretty open conversation about how do we move forward from that point on.
Well, let me just ask you, let me follow up on one of your comments. You said really the programming can wait because you have to have safe facilities. Certainly in your best practices research, you found that having intensive therapeutic programming available, including idleness reduction, and for all of those in mental observation units to have something in the nature of PABs, could help to dramatically reduce the incidence among those that are mentally ill. Is there a reason that has not been implemented to try to see what effort can be made to reduce violence among the mentally ill before putting them in enhanced supervision units?
As you're aware, the city has offered additional funding for four additional units that are same model as CAPS, other than we'll put you in there prior to an infraction. So we're probably a month away from opening our first unit in that model. So 6 weeks. So we are proceeding ahead with exactly like you said.
Thank you. Dr. Safer?
Yes, Commissioner, I'm curious to hear more about predictive analytics that you will use to identify the patients that go into the HSU. What I'm getting at, and I think we discussed it a bit, is there's a balance between sensitivity and specificity, and it's very important to not have the wrong people there for a variety of reasons, or the people that are not prone to violence. So I'm curious about how we will conduct that screening.
So there's some obvious indicators. If you've committed violence, if you had a serious assault or cut or assaulted somebody, you'd obviously be, you'd be probably first on the list. For those who have a propensity of violence, those who may have acted out in the community, may have gotten to the point of not actually committing a violent act, but have the likelihood that they may, those will get a little bit subjective. So it would be built off of intel, it would be built off of staff reports, and it would be built off of our gang units and other intel units telling us that this person may be violent within our custody. So it's not good enough for us just to respond to incidents. We're trying to prevent incidents from occurring. That's part of our plan.
So you're saying that someone who has not committed an act of violence, but who you feel may be violent in the future, that person could be sent to ESH?
Correct. With certain issues, meaning what the charge was, what they've done on the street, prior history, but there'd be other things that we look at more than just the behavior at the time.
This is something that I said at the outset, that, and then I'll turn to Dr. Cohen, that if the board moves to place this proposed rule into the CAPA process, we would want to look at this closely during our deliberation and also hear from stakeholders and the departments. Dr. Cohen.
Yeah, a number of questions both for Commissioner Pont and for Commissioner Bassett, since the issues being raised here have everything to do with the Department of Health's mental hygiene's programs on Rikers Island. First a statement. Really, the average length of stay in punitive segregation units is 14 days. When the calendar year began, when this administrative started, it was 14 days. It went up from 14 to 15. There's been, the department describes a substantial reduction, but in fact, over the past year, there's just been a slight increase. And so we should not expect much to happen with a 90-day to 30-day change in the sentencing. I am concerned, however, that you stated that you were not going to you were going to repurpose the RHUs, and use those cells as part of the punitive segregation unit capacity on Rikers Island. You subtracted the number of RHU cells, added that to the total capacity, and promised the State Commission that you would not reduce the number of people in total punitive segregation at that time. Additionally, you're pledging to create, I don't know how many, I'm going to ask you a question, Commissioner, please.
Please just ask the question. It's going to answer your question.
Well, I didn't finish it, but if you'd like to, sure, you can go ahead.
No, it's just, as we told the board, we need to respond to the backlog. So part of that response was to get the backlog done. So that's why it wouldn't make sense to reduce cells and also try to reduce the backlog. But currently, we're looking at probably 8 months to get the backlog completed.
I understand it's about getting the backlog, but you said that when this is all done, you will still have the same number of punitive segregation cells, 23 hours a day lockdown. You also are describing an increase in a new unit called PSU Light, where you will have an unknown, you haven't identified. I tried to ask you that question, but the question wasn't forwarded to you. How many people would you think would be in PSU Light? And additionally, you're creating a unit. Now you're asking for 250 beds, but you have also said in your letters to the board that 250 is not enough to cover the number of people you think should be in this unit. So I want to know: are you going to have you're planning on closing down the RHUs and integrating this population into the regular solitary confinement question? And I'll have some other questions.
Okay, RHUs as currently designed, I think Mary would agree, don't work very well for us. So we're looking at a new model that we think will be better. So, and part of that will be working on the definition of who goes in and who doesn't go in. But the model itself does not work very well. So we're looking at a new model. It's hard to have a discussion at an open meeting when we haven't had the dialogue with DOH as to what that model should look like.
But you told that to the State Commission, and we're here being asked. I mean, the Board of Corrections has, through its committees, been working on the issue of solitary confinement, punitive segregation, and mental illness. We have rules that have been drafted that have been provided to the board members. So we have thought about it. We've talked to you about it. It's unusual, I think, for us to be asked to promulgate a rule in the City Register today when we haven't addressed this fundamental issue. If I could ask Commissioner Bassett, what the Commissioner has said that he wants to repurpose the unit, eliminate clearances by the department, and I have one other question for you, which is if you could reflect on Dr. Safir's question about how valid is the prediction model, and how many people that's been proposed here in terms of how many people would be placed in these units who would be not likely to commit a violent act.
Okay, thank you for all those questions, Dr. Cohen. I hope I can get them all right. The first thing I want to note is that the CAPS unit, that stands for the Clinical Alternative to Punitive Segregation, is a unit that is run by the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, obviously in collaboration with the
Mr. Bassett, if you could just bring the mic closer.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh yes, that's the solution. I'll start over. So the CAPS unit, which stands for Clinical Alternatives to Punitive Segregation, is a unit that was developed by the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, in which we work collaboratively with the Department of Corrections to administer it. I would say that we jointly agree as two agencies that these units, there are 3 of them, have been enormously successful. They're for people with serious mental illness who have committed infractions, but they're non-punitive units. They are units in which the inmates are put in a therapeutic environment, and the data show that these units are substantially less violent than other settings. Our concerns about the restricted housing units, that's what RHU stands for, are that they're too violent, and we see this in the form of injuries. The rate of injuries are too high. We had hoped that we would see the same kind of experience that occurred in the CAPS unit, but we have not. And Commissioner Pont and I have discussed this, and we are in agreement that a new strategy is needed for these units. And we have begun the process of discussions at staff level to achieve it. But I think it's important for the board to understand that the CAPS units are therapeutic units and are for people with mental illness. The expansion of the therapeutic setting to mental observation units is what Commissioner Pont just referred to. The acronym is PACE, and I have to defer to staff. There's so many acronyms, I can't remember what that one stands for.
That's the Program for Accelerated Clinical Effectiveness.
The Program for Accelerated Clinical Effectiveness. There are 4 mental observation units, which are for people with mental health diagnoses, that are going to have added therapeutic components building on our successful experience in CAPS. These are non-punitive units for people with mental illness. I think, were those your questions on, and then the last one was on the decision rules?
And also if you could comment on the fact that there will be no clearance for mentally ill. The Commissioner wrote to the State Commission on Correctional who was going to eliminate clearance for mentally ill into solitary confinement, and also that the ESH units would have mentally ill people within them.
Okay, on the idea that there would be no clearance for people with mental health diagnoses who have been assigned time in solitary confinement as punishment. I'm not aware of that. I haven't seen Commissioner Pont's letter to the state, so I'd be happy to comment on it if once I have the chance to look at it.
What is, just as a point of fact, Commissioner Pont,
yes.
Is that included in the screen, and then does it trigger some other look?
So we had some conversations about doing a screening on coming in. So I think that's what we were talking about. So there'd be no separate screening for segregation of these other units. Now that's part of a discussion that Commissioner and I still have ongoing. So right now, people
I
are
see. This is about the proposed variance request that we've been hoping to bring to the Board of Corrections. So I guess people have been in conversations about this. But the idea here would be to separate the assessment of people's, to identify groups of people for whom we feel placement in solitary confinement as punishment would be inappropriate. And so that decision would be made independent of the punitive process. So that's a conversation that we are in, that we have had some discussions, and we hope eventually that we'll be able to recommend a variance request to you. I think the last question was about what is the decision rule whereby someone would be considered eligible for this proposed enhanced supervision. And I have seen a draft of the variance request just this morning. I mean, rather the proposed new rulemaking this morning. I didn't see a decision rule in that.
I was asking
the question, I mean, what I can say, speaking as a public health physician, is that the occurrence of violent events is actually, although horrible, and all of us agree should not happen, is relatively rare. And for example, I believe I saw on one of the slides 88 slashings, and out of 11,000 inmates, that's a relatively rare event. It is very, very difficult to predict rare events.
Thank you. Yeah, I want to open it up to other board members.
So, being new to the board, I walk in the door. This is the first issue that comes across the table, and I experienced being inundated with emails from board members speaking to this issue, and I'm so appreciative of the emails that were shared. I am glad that the Corporation Counsel opined that this was not something that should be considered as a variance, but rather needed to be put into the rulemaking process. It is a material change, and as such it needs to be considered in that regard. That said, having been a city leader and an official, I very much appreciate that there is a process that is in play, rulemaking, and you've been hard at work over the last year in that regard, various members of the board have been hard at work leading efforts and such. But as a city leader and official, I know that sometimes exigent circumstances warrant that sometimes you have to do things differently than the routine course of matters. And when I see that violence is on the rise and that there's an effort to get at this issue, then I believe that you do have to move expeditiously while thoughtfully. What I believe putting this proposal into rulemaking at this point will do is it will allow for the necessary hearings to be had, for various opinions to be talked about and discussed. It will allow for thoughtful deliberation. Am I wrong to believe, and being new to the board, that if this goes into rulemaking and it goes into CAPA, that will not happen? If it will happen, then I move that we move forward because we've got to act thoughtfully, expeditiously to get this matter under hand.
Mr. Regan?
Welcome again. I second your proposal. You're talking about safety. You're talking about the safety of the people in this room. The statistics are unbelievable, right? I'm here 14 years, as I said. The statistics are sobering and horrendous. The attacks on medical personnel are up 158%. It is time to do something, Commissioner. You've come to these meetings. You've acted like a reformer. You're talking about safety. I move the item. I second it.
Discussion.
Right. Any other comments or other board members we haven't heard from today? Judge Hamill?
Just, in terms of discussion, as chair of the Adolescent Young Adult Rulemaking Committee, as requested by the chair, I've engaged in fact-finding meetings, reviews of draft standards prepared by our staff, research of best practices, discussion of decision-making in open, transparent, deliberative process as per your charges to the rulemaking committees in January. Our fiduciary responsibilities are to the City of New York, the people of New York, to establish minimum standards and to ensure compliance, care, custody, treatment, supervision, and discipline. Late yesterday afternoon, after serving on this board for 1 year with absolutely no notice to the chairs of the rulemaking committees, the proposed rules for ESHU, without addressing the substantial questions of exclusion of vulnerable groups, including young adults, the mentally ill, the physically disabled, due process, programming, with absolutely no opportunity for a full board discussion, in doing so prior to having a public meeting, which has absolutely been our process this entire year. For the past 6 months, I have proposed some piecemeal rules that we, as the Board of Correction, had all agreed to. But because CAPA requires certifications from the Mayor's Office of Operations and Corporation Council's certifications, the chair and the executive director said we would submit all the rules together. I believe this would be a grave injustice to the work of this board and to the people of the City of New York to consider these proposed rules alone to start the CAPA process without the others, and most importantly, without the most significant questions being addressed, whether those suffering from mental illness will be excluded from the enhanced supervision unit, and what, if any, clearance they will be, especially in light of the Commissioner's statements that accounts for 60% of the violence. Commissioner Pont said in his testimony before state lawmakers last week, he conceded that has not been worked out, and there was much work to be done with respect to how to address the mental health issues. In my opinion, that has to be addressed first, and it's not my experience it will occur once CAPA starts. We propose the rules that are inclusive. This process is flawed. It is nothing short of sandbagging the Board of Correction, which is meant to be an independent oversight and regulatory authority. I would move to table to meet with our pro bono attorneys, Paul Weiss, here today to discuss the legal implications and issues as potentially a breach of our fiduciary responsibilities to the City of New York, with potential liability arising, including even a breach of office that I have sworn to uphold.
what I am concerned about is having read over the course of the last few weeks, what amounts to probably at least 500 pieces of paper on this issue. It seems to me that the case has been made that this is a serious matter that warrants urgent consideration and action. What I understand from my work having chaired the Procurement Policy Board is that when rules are put into capital, you can have a thoughtful, deliberate exchange and discussion. And all of the issues that you're raising seem to me to be ones that would go through the capital process. There would be opportunity to be heard, for us to have thoughtful exchange and debate. And so I am not clear, again, on what we lose other than moving as expeditiously as we can to address what is a mounting serious issue.
If I could ask everyone to just hold their applause so we can have the discussion. Mr. Cephas?
There'll be no need to apologize.
Well, you're new. You get a lot of applause.
Okay. This is a process question. And I'm new, 3 weeks on the board, so I just want to make sure. As I understand this, once we issue today a proposed rule, then it goes through the capital process. And I just want to make sure my understanding is correct, so that in a future subsequent meeting, when we take this up probably to adopt it in final form, that the text of the proposed rule, we're not constrained, we're not circumscribed in any way as to what we do with respect to the final, that the text of the proposed rule doesn't constrain us in any way.
Mr. Cephas, let me turn to...
And so that we are free to take what's proposed, deliberate on it, do whatever kind of research and input we need, and then we adopt the final. If that's the correct understanding, I'm prepared to move forward on what we have.
And just to piggyback that we are not being asked to explicitly endorse the language as proposed today.
That's correct. I'd like to turn to our acting executive director, also our general counsel, and just what Mr. Cephas and Mr. Berman outlined, as well as Ms. Austin, is correct.
Can everybody hear me?
Close.
It is correct that the language that is proposed today does not need to be the same language that is approved eventually, and that there will be a process where a date will be set for a hearing, likely towards the end of December. And before that hearing, there would be an opportunity for people to submit written comments, to let us know that they want to testify live at the hearing. There will also be opportunities for folks to let us know if they need a reasonable accommodation in order to understand or participate in the hearing. And after that hearing takes place, there will be opportunities for the board members to discuss amongst themselves what to make of the comments that were given and what changes should be made to the language that was proposed.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, Dr. Sager.
Just to clarify. So we're being asked to vote on a variance or a provisional.
A rule.
No, a rule. And that provisional rule can be modified by all of the past work and all of our future deliberations.
That's correct.
So there's nothing written in stone about what we're agreeing to. And we're just agreeing to move forward with a rule that can be modified.
Absolutely. Dr. Cohn?
Yeah, I have participated as a worker on Rikers Island for Montefiore Medical Center, contract with the Department of Health. I was involved in rulemaking regarding mental health services, which established decent rules, which took years to develop. They were careful. I was involved in the process of creating. Thank you very much. I was involved in the Chairman.
Can we start handing out things in the middle of the meeting? We did already hand out the debt petition. Is that going to be considered too?
I was involved. Can I finish talking?
Dr.
For 30 years, I've watched the Board of Correction and participated in the process of developing standards and developing rules, and this has always been a deliberate and careful process in which the members of the board recognized that they had a grave responsibility that the minimum standards of the Department of Correction set a floor, a moral and political floor, not to to protect our citizens. We were on Rikers Island and in the other jails, the detainees, many of whom wouldn't be there if they had the cash to make minimal bail, like the man who boiled to death because he couldn't make a $2,500 bail earlier this year. I have never been involved in a situation where the chairman of the board sends me at 6 o'clock at night, the day before a meeting, a request for or heard of anything like this, where we don't have the chance to give us a set of rules which we have not had the chance to analyze and discuss. The process of rulemaking we began regarding solitary confinement began over a year ago, and but instead this proposal discards discards a year's worth of conversations, of meetings, of hearings, of research, where we've met with groups from all over the city, where we've met with the unions who are present here today, where we've met with the departments of health and the departments of correction, and just says, forget about all that. It doesn't matter. What we're going to do is we're going to eliminate, if you give us ESH, if you allow us ESH, then we will let you make a rule that says that people who haven't done it, people who did something 10 years ago and have days owed of owed time, that we will no longer, we'll no longer put them in solitary confinement. Doris Shiro could have done that. Commissioner Pont could have done that. We've asked him to do it repeatedly. This is not significant, and all of the issues that we have raised and have draft rules for are being discarded right now to create a process, the efficacy of which has not been demonstrated. I agree that there is a crisis of violence on Rikers Island. The Department of Justice agrees that there is a crisis of violence on Rikers Island. These rules are attempting to address part of it, and I have offered to commit to Chairman Campbell to meet with Commissioner Pont to discuss how we could create a tailored set of rules for those persons on Rikers, who are on Rikers Island, who need to be incapacitated in terms of the danger that they provide. I don't claim, I've never claimed that nobody needs to be in some situation where they won't hurt other people. I recognize that, but this is much too broad, and we are being asked to promulgate in the city record a rule which we have, according to CAPA, narrowly tailored to needs that have to be addressed right now. I mean, the members of the board, particularly the new members of the board, one could say here that it doesn't matter what we write down because we can put anything else afterwards, but please, this is serious. I mean, this is not the way that the Board of Correction should proceed. I am very concerned that if we rushed this precipitous process forward without the necessary and careful deliberation which it requires, that we will injure prisoners today and in the future on Rikers Island who depend upon the Board of Correction, to maintain minimum standards for their safety. There is no rush on this. This idea of an ESH was proposed by Commissioner Pont to Chairman Campbell in July of this year. All of these rules were handed, were transmitted to Chairman Campbell, and then they were withdrawn. There was no emergency. From July 28th till October 22nd, we heard nothing. There was no discussion between any board member and the department regarding these things. There was no discussion between any staff member and the department regarding those things. So if there were an exigency, I understand, but there isn't. I'd like to make one other point.
Just briefly.
Yes, I'm sure.
Our colleagues have an opportunity to speak.
The Board of Correction and the CAPA process is not nimble. It is not nimble. It is not easy to do that. And your concern about exigencies is quite right. But I would propose instead that the board adopt a rule which allows us to consider through a variance type process, experiments where the department will come to us and say, this is a best practice, we can't do it because of your rules, without characterizing their quality. We can't do this without your rules, but we really think it's the right thing to do. Let us narrowly craft a plan, such as ESH in one unit for a limited period of time. We will tell you in advance why we want to do it. We will tell you in advance how we will measure its efficacy. And then we will come back to you and explain that it works or that it doesn't work. We should not be tampering with the minimum standards at this point in this way. So I really urge the board to table this resolution.
Just a point of clarification, in terms of the efforts of the board in terms of rulemaking, that will continue because this rule before us is much narrower. So what we're engaged upon is much broader, more encompassing. Judge Hamilton.
Yeah, I just want to respond to a couple of the questions about the process. When Kathy Potler was alive, we learned the complexity of starting the CAPA process and how important it was to know what all the proposed rules would be, because part of what is necessary is the Mayor's Office of Operations to go do a thorough review and a certification about the specific proposed rules. Corporation Counsel likewise has to do that about the specific proposed rules. So if these rules are, through the CAPA process, substantially modified in what the Board of Correction will approve, then in my opinion, we're going to have to start that certification process all again. So I would have a motion to, if the motion to table is not going to be granted, then I would move to amend Jennifer Jones Austin motion to include adoption by the Board of Correction of the Jail Action Coalition petition that has clearly laid out all the proposed rules, all the arguments in favor of, the law that supports it, that essentially supports the extensive rulemaking we've done. And that way, it is all before the Board of Correction and you for the public hearing and us so we can consider it as a whole. We were prepared to vote on this within a few weeks. There's been an inordinate delay for no reason that I know of. And perhaps this is the reason. So I move to amend your motion to include the adoption of the rules from the Jail Action Coalition, which represents all of the stakeholders who have been actively participating in our rulemaking process.
I second the motion.
So,
I think technically you have to withdraw the first motion, you have to act upon the first motion.
Right. So the first motion would be.
Sorry.
So, Jennifer, Ms. Austin, what's your thought in terms of, or Amanda, in terms of how?
I'm just asking the chair.
So, there's a motion before us to amend the rule.
The first motion is to table.
Okay, the first motion is to table the proposed rule that's before the board to place it to CAPA. And there's a second for that, is that correct? All in favor of tabling the motion, raise your hand. 2, all opposed? 6 board members. The motion fails. There's a motion before the board to put the proposed rule into the CAPA process that's before the board today. I would ask a motion for that. Second? Second? All in favor of putting the proposed rule that's before the board into the CAPA process today, please raise your hands. 6, all opposed? 2.
So I have another motion then. My motion is to vote on the proposed rules as submitted to us and discussed and deliberated as to Jail Action Coalition's proposed rules, to put that into the CAPA process as well today so we can have a full CAPA process and expedite the proposed rules for the Board of Correction.
It's already in the according, Ms. Masters?
Just so I understand the motion a little better,
We submitted them today. We resubmitted.
New ones today.
New ones today, we resubmitted.
The original board got that nearly a year ago. Since we just got the other the proposed rule last night, Jail Action Coalition proposed rules have been circulated. So I'm asking.
So my understanding of the history of the way the current capital rulemaking process that we are already in transpired was that originally the Jails Action Coalition put together a very detailed set of regulations with underlying explanations about our authority, why they were good public policy, and the like. There was a board vote under previous chair, no, and then subsequently under this chair, there was another vote initiated by the board to vote yes and to go into that capital rulemaking process. And I apologize, I was not aware that more materials were submitted today.
Right, and the board at that time, correct me if I'm wrong, did not agree to adopt the Jail Action Coalition proposal, but rather to, excuse me, but rather to engage in rulemaking. Is that correct?
Right. So that's, the capital rulemaking process 1043 says that we're going to be promulgating in the city record this. We have not promulgated in the city record the Jail Action Coalition proposed rules. We have spent a year analyzing those rules, taking testimony on those rules, and so the motion that Judge Hamill is making is that we, in addition to putting forward for the consideration of the city's court counsel and the mayor's office, and for the consideration of the board, and for public hearings, the rules proposed in the JAC petition. Before we accepted the petition, now the proposal is that just as today, without any discussion, we are promulgating the rules proposed by, I don't know who proposed these rules actually, because they didn't come from the the Board of Correction. I really don't know where they came from. I would actually like to know who developed these rules. But additionally, from the Board of Correction now, I would like to propose that we consider, in addition, because they're intimately linked, the recommendations for rule changes that are contained in the JAC petition, so that we can have a comprehensive discussion of how to limit the unnecessary use of solitary confinement and address the culture of violence on Rikers Island.
See, this morning in front of us to the CAPA process. All in favor, raise your hand. 3 people, all opposed. The motion fails. Okay, we will move on to the next agenda item, which is continuing variance requests, and I did turn to Ms. Masters to walk us through those.
A number of requests have been posed today by the Department of Corrections. We do not have any today from the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene. So these are all Department of Correction requests. The first request is a variance for minimum standard 102, which relates to classification of prisoners. Can everyone hear me okay? This is a variance which was originally granted in 1989 and has subsequently been reapproved ever since by the board. It allows for adolescents who are sentenced as well as adolescents who are pretrial to be housed together, as long as the adolescents who are sentenced are given all of the same rights of a pretrial detainee. And this was originally granted because of space constraints. And the department has been using it since 1989. And they are requesting that the variance be continued.
Is there a motion to continue this variance? Is there a motion for continuation of this variance?
Next item.
Okay, so the board does not want to continue. How long has this variance been in existence?
Since 1989.
Since 1989. Okay, move on to the next one. Excuse me. Any questions on the first variance from board members?
The second variance request from the Department of Correction concerns Board of Correction minimum standard 1-02 classification of prisoners and has been in place ever since 2009. This is a variance that allows for the commingling of adolescent and adult detainees who are pregnant at Rosie's. Normally, our standards would prohibit the commingling of adolescents and adults. The reason this variance was granted back in 2009 was the idea that if these women were housed together in the same housing area, it would be helpful to prevent them from having access to contagious diseases, to make sure that they have an appropriate diet and prenatal care together. I had a discussion with General Counsel at the Department of Corrections about what appears to be a conflict now with federal law, now that the regulations under the Prison Rape Elimination Act, PREA, have come out, and they do prohibit commingling within housing areas, even if those housing areas are under direct supervision. I posed that question to General Counsel and asked her to consider whether or not this variance request would be renewed. It does appear to me, although a laudable goal and something that seems to have been working for the department, to be something that now violates federal and state laws that prohibit commingling. So my recommendation to the board would be to at least inquire how many young women are affected. Are any young women affected by this rule right now, and is it possible to come up with an alternative way to protect their health?
So I mean, just to that question, Commissioner, to you or your staff, I mean, how many women would be affected, and are there alternatives?
It'd be a small number.
I'm pretty sure the number today is 2, but we'll confirm that.
Okay, so that's something that clearly that the department could work through. So would we need to have an emotion, or just it would lapse if we don't take action?
It will lapse if we don't.
Is there anybody in the nursery? 2?
I'm sorry, this is not for the nursery. This is for a housing area.
Not that housing area? Okay.
It lapses when? Effective immediately or today?
Yes.
I would just make a motion so that it's really clear, because I know we've had continuing variances that never got voted on that somehow continued, that in light of the fact we have council's opinion that this variance is preempted by federal law, Rape Prison Elimination Act, that the variance is terminated effective today.
There's a motion to that effect. A second? Second. All in favor? Opposed? The motion, the variance, it ends as of today. Okay, the third variance, Ms. Master?
The third variance has already been tabled. It is the continuing request regarding the 18 to 21-year-old cohort, which was previously discussed. The next variance is a request for a variance from the minimum standard 1-03 relating to personal hygiene, which allows the department to put detainees who are in punitive segregation in uniforms. This variance is designed to help the department control violence in those units, reduce the number of places that a person can hide things in their clothes. The inmates who are in punitive segregation do have their, we do require that their jumpsuits be laundered appropriately, and that every time they go to court for grand jury or for trial, that they're given their street clothes so that they can make a proper appearance in front of the judge. This is a minimum standard that, a variance that has been in place since 1991.
The variance has been in place since 1991. A motion to continue the variance?
Well, I actually have a question. Is this, since variance, as we know from the variance request for enhanced supervision, housing, it appears clear that the board has not even been following its own rules. The way that the board holds the agencies accountable, the board also has to follow its own rule. Is this consistent with the rule we have on variances? And since it's been continued for so long, is this being considered for a rule change in the rulemaking process we're doing now?
The standard, I was not here in 1991 for the discussion of this standard. However, I agree that the difference between wearing your street clothes and wearing a uniform is the sort of thing that may not meet the threshold of being something the department cannot accomplish. And if the issue is that you do not use the variance process unless it is something that you cannot accomplish, then I think you've raised a very good question.
So the question is about consideration of moving the possibility of continuing as a variance, but with the understanding that we need to look at it in the context of the rule. Is there a vote? Mr. Regan, there was a motion to move forward with this variance. Is there a second?
Second.
Second. All in favor? All opposed? Okay, the motion passes. The variance will continue. The next variance.
The next variance request is from minimum standard 1-03, which pertains to personal hygiene as well. This is a variance that's been in place since 2003, a time at which there were a number of troubling suicides where inmates were able to use their bed sheets to tie nooses and harm themselves. The variance allows for inmates who are on suicide watch to wear a special suicide smock that cannot be turned into a noose, and also to use special bedding that is such that you cannot possibly fashion a noose out of it. It is something that is designed to protect the health and well-being of the inmates, and it has been in place, as I said, since 2003.
Is there a motion to continue with this variance? Motion by Mr. Regan, a second? Second. All in favor? Motion passed. The variance will continue. The next variance?
The next variance is relates to minimum standard 1-04, overcrowding. This is a variance which allows for some dorm housing on Rikers Island to have increased capacity beyond the capacity that is allowed in our regulations. It allows for dorms at EMTC to contain up to 60 prisoners, MDC to contain up to 60 per dorm, OBCC to contain up to 60 per dorm, and VCBC, which is the boat in the Bronx, to contain up to 55 prisoners per dorm. It was granted to the department in 2004 and again in 2005. Not all four were not in the initial 2004 granting, but by 2005, all four were granted. That was a point in time at which the census for prisoners was higher, and we are now...
What is the maximum standard?
It varies from facility to facility, but it was considerably smaller. We're at a point in time right now where the number of inmates is approximately 10,976, and approximately 80% of cells in the system are being used. So that we're at a point when the population is smaller, One question I might suggest to the board is whether this variance continues to be necessary, and is it actually utilized in those facilities?
Commissioner, I turn to you and your staff for that question.
The variance is currently being used in these facilities, yes.
So you are going to the higher
Yes.
limits. Dr. Cohn?
Yeah, I guess we haven't received any information from the department explaining why this is necessary right now. I think Amanda has made the point that there's a lot more space on Rikers Island. I think that because of the risk of violence when there are less officers, when there's a smaller officer to prison ratio, this is not a good idea. And you know, unless we receive some information from the department why it's a critical variance to continue with, we should not approve it. And if the department wants to provide us with the information in the future, we can reconsider it.
I agree. I think Bob was spot on. I remember these conversations in 2004 and 2005. There were extraordinary circumstances, so I think Bob was right.
So there would be, is there a motion that not to approve the variance? Dr. Cohn, is that and then a second? Mr. Cephas, okay. All in favor of denying the variance? Okay, the variance carries in terms of not continuing.
And the final request from the Department of Correction is for a variance from our standard 1-06, which relates to recreation and allows for limited indoor recreation for inmates who are in the communicable disease unit, the CDUs, at the West facility, who are there because they are too sick to be among other people. The variance allows the department to give them indoor recreational activities such as arts and crafts and that sort of thing. And
Go ahead. How long has it been in effect? For a while here. Just try to see how long this variance has been in effect. Any discussion on the variance? Is there a...
Move the item?
Yes. Second? Is there a second to second? All in favor of continuing with this variance? Opposed? Motion passes 7, with 1 abstention. Then the last variance is on the next page, which is having to do with Thanksgiving. Ms. Masters? So moved. Could you just state for the record what the variance is?
Sure, and that last one about arts and crafts was ever since 1992.
1992.
Sorry.
Thank you. Okay, the next variance before us regarding Thanksgiving.
This is a Thanksgiving variance that is granted every year by the Board of Correction for the Department of Correction to encourage and facilitate inmate visits with family members and friends. The department requests that visits on Thanksgiving Day can be conducted on a day schedule rather than an evening schedule, which is a variance for minimum standard 1-09, which requires the department to provide at least 2 evening visits on Monday through Friday.
Is there a motion to approve this variance? So moved. Second? Second. All in favor? It's unanimous. Thank you. Our next agenda item is the GRVC multi-day lockdown. And there were a number of problems associated with GRVC this October. The board has raised a number of concerns, particularly Dr. Cohen, and a multi-day lockdown occurred from October 6th through October 10th. From October 9th to 10th, an emergency variance was sought by the Department of Correction and was granted by the board. However, the board has repeatedly requested information concerning what mandated services provided to each area, and we have gotten limited information from the Department of Corrections. Mr. Pine, I'd like to turn to you on this issue. Thank you.
So we did look at this. Legal counsel looked into this, speaking with our facility staff. We one of the problems is that we don't collect information in this manner, so it was hard to gather that. One of the things that we looked at was medication compliance. So those inmates that were due medication, was there any change in their medication compliance during these lockdowns? And Eric has the best information on that. Can you respond to that?
In our discussions with the health department, what we learned is that during this period, though it was significantly more staff intensive to get medications to the folks in GRVC, medication compliance was in line with normal rates.
Was sick call reported to the prisoners in this area?
My understanding is yes.
People sent for sick call and they were taken to sick call? Yes?
People were, sorry. I don't think that anybody, I don't think we afforded normal sick call as per the lockdown. Obviously, emergency sick call and those who needed to be seen for certain types of care were seen.
The request for an emergency variance to allow for a 24-hour or 48-hour or a 72-hour or a 96-hour lockdown as occurred here is based upon the importance of providing services. And you didn't ask for lockdowns for most of those days, but yet the facility was closed all day, and according to our staff, people did not go did not get sick call. Did the Department of Health answer that question? Was sick call, regular sick call, available to people during any of these days, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday of that week?
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Ford, the Executive Director of Mental Health. So we don't have fabulous numbers about sick call. We know there were disruptions in sick call, and it did not happen as typical. We also know that there was no mental health programming afforded in the way that we usually would like to have it done, especially in the RHUs.
The importance here is that the Board of Correction is supposed to be notified by the department when they're going to lock down a unit for 24 hours. The department's position is that from 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. it doesn't count, and since everybody's locked down anyway, so if they only lock down the facility from 5 a.m. to 9 p.m., that's less than 24 hours, so it's not really a facility being locked down. I think this is an area that we should have further discussions, and certainly request that when the department is not going to be providing mental health services or medical care services, that it alert the board to this fact.
I agree with Dr. Cohen, and the other thing is that we hopefully sooner rather than later will be getting the same lockdown reports to the Commissioner that you and your staff will receive.
I'd just like to add that we don't keep the information and hadn't kept that information like that. The lockdown report would just be on the violence. So we will begin to collect that information from the point of the lockdown, all those necessary services, what was provided and what was changed. So we'll provide those things to the board in the future.
Good, thank you. The next agenda item is GRVC 12 Main. The area 12 Main, which is located inside the GRVC clinic and houses SMI, seriously mentally ill, punitive segregation inmates with little access to services, was subject to a large number of inmate fires, which seriously affected the health of clinic staff and rendered the clinic intermittently inaccessible for the rest of the facility. We understand most of the 9 SMI inmates have been relocated, but are concerned that 12 Main not be repurposed again, and wanted to hear from the department on 12 Main. Commissioner?
Yeah, so we all agree. It was something that fundamentally did not work. I think all the inmates are out, except one, and we're in the process of finalizing that. I think Eric can fill in anything additional.
We worked carefully with the Department of Health to find the appropriate location for each of the former members of 12 Main. All but one have been relocated so far successfully. The final person in that area should move by the end of the day today, no later than tomorrow.
I visited 12 Main, as did Amanda recently, and I'd just like to, if this was a terrible place, it spelled, you know, there were fires being set every day or every other day. It's very dangerous. There are people in there serving thousands of days of solitary confinement. There were excessive uses of force and extractions, and I just want to compliment the Department of Health for its consistent efforts to try to close this unit down. Horizon staff also, publicly and personally asked that this situation be ended, that they could not provide mental health services in this area. But just, it should be known that when I began on the board in 2009, 12 Main was 12 Main. It was the same horrible place that it is now, that it wasn't until last week. It was shut down when board members came there and said, this is a bad place, and it was repurposed again, was closed down, and then it was set up again. There should be some process involved where the department remembers its history and does not set up another horror show like 12 Main again.
Thank you, Dr. Cohen.
Welcome.
Then the next agenda item, two very untimely deaths. Masters.
The board would like to ask questions of the Department of Correction and the Department of Mental Health about two deaths that occurred in October. One was a gentleman who was 53 years old and had not been in the system very long. The other is a gentleman who's 24 years old. And both of these deaths raise some questions about the policies for providing first aid and CPR to inmates and the procedures for getting them to medical care quickly.
We would request going into executive session to answer any questions.
To hear about this?
Excuse me. Commissioner Pond?
We would request going into an executive session to answer any questions.
What's the reason for that?
Because these are ongoing investigations.
Ongoing investigations. Dr. Cohen?
I would just suggest that we continue, at least if that's going to be granted, any other business before the board. And I certainly would have business, and that would be to move to amend the bylaws of the Board of Correction to hold monthly meetings, as had been done in the past. As we've all heard, we have a Department of Justice investigation and report. We have escalating violence to the extent that ESHU has been put into CAPA. We have the DOI's report. We've got deaths that raise significant issues, and to be able to carry out our oversight and regulatory authority, monthly public meetings where these issues can be aired and discussed among the board are unnecessary.
So I would request the board's indulgence to have a conversation with board members on that particular point and bring this issue back at the next board.
I would second the motion. It is very difficult for us to get to cover the material, the issues that arise on Rikers Island on a bi-monthly basis. And the new board members can see how much material that they're having to deal with right now, and we've had to deal with. So I think it's a good idea. I think it probably would be 11 months a year, perhaps. I don't know if an August meeting would be a good idea but basically a monthly meeting is something we should do.
Personally, I think it's something we should talk about, but I'd like to have, and given the lateness of the hour, I'd like to have the opportunity for the back and forth with the board. But that being said, how many favor?
Would we pick that up at the next meeting?
That's my suggestion. That it be considered at the next board meeting, and in between we can have discussions amongst board members.
Is that a motion to table, so we're following proper procedure?
Well, there's a motion right now before us that we be 12 meetings.
It's seconded.
Right.
So
that
it's a motion to table.
No, we would ask to first vote for the motion in front of us for 12 meetings a year. All is in favor?
It's 11.
11. I was amended to say 11. All in favor? Are we opposed?
I'm not opposed to it. I think that it requires additional conversation. Right. The board did have monthly meetings for many years, and it is worth thinking that through.
Absolutely. So the motion did not fail, but clearly with the intention that this will be seriously considered by the board at its January meeting. Any other issues before we have our public forum?
Well, there is an issue about this last item. We don't have to, if we're going to discuss these deaths because there's an investigation, but I'd like to know, given the fact that there were deaths and that there were serious issues raised about the availability of CPR to these persons, has the Department of Correction and or the Department of Health taken any action to review the training for CPR and notification of emergencies within the department? Have there been any have any staff been counseled because of these actions? And just what period.
Is that a question?
Yes, I said, have there been any training or about the protocol for notification of emergencies and training around CPR? And have any staff been counseled consequent to these deaths and the CPR questions, which were the lack of access to CPR, which was raised?
Dr. Rosner from Deputy Medical Director of Correctional Health. We have a robust internal morbidity and mortality review. Sorry. Thank you. Thanks for your question. We have a robust morbidity and mortality review that is ongoing in the Department of Health. Often findings come out of this process. Their meeting is, I believe, on Friday. And we work with Department of Corrections to address any issues that come up within the Department of Corrections protocols. We do have concerns about the CPR as well, and there's regular training that occurs with the Department of Corrections, and we'll continue to work with them on that.
Thank you. Thank you. So we are going to, we're going to be moving into the public forum, and I'd also remind the board that we have an executive session with our pro bono counsel, Paul Weiss, to talk about legal issues as well as to talk about a personnel matter. And we will begin, and I'm pleased to say that we are honored to have with us today the public advocate, Ms. James. And Claudia Rain. Thank you.
When those findings are concluded, I would hope that you would forward a copy of those findings to my office. I would greatly appreciate it. So first, and also I concur with the recommendation that this board hold monthly meetings. I'll get there. So I would hope that the board would meet monthly. I think given all of the information that has been discussed today, clearly bi-monthly meetings does not do injustice. So to the members of the board and others, thank you for the opportunity to allow me to speak this morning. I'm glad to hear that Commissioner Ponte is pushing for real reforms to the rules governing punitive segregation, and that he is planning to increase the use of cameras at Rikers Island. I'm also very happy with regards to the openness of today's hearings and the number of reforms that were put forth today. But I'm here today because it is evident that for many years, the Board of Corrections has not been performing the oversight role envisioned by the New York City Charter. With the appointment of 3 new board members, I expect the era of non-compliance is over, because it is clear that this agency is in need of rigorous oversight. Since January, since the time that I took office, my office has received a number of reports from family members of individuals incarcerated at Rikers Island. Some of the reports include an inmate suffering from schizophrenia who was the victim of a documented use of force while awaiting a court hearing. An inmate suffering from depression who said he was kicked and pepper sprayed to prevent him from taking his medication. An inmate who was told he was being placed in punitive segregation as retaliation for reporting a use of force, and several inmates who spent days without medical attention after allegedly being beaten by a guard.
Correctional.
And that goes on, and the list goes on, a correction officer. We know from the report issued by the Department of Justice on August 4th, as well as numerous investigative pieces done by the New York Times, that the issues raised by these family members are not isolated incidents, but instead reflect a need for substantial and systematic institutional reform. Those individual complaints are indicative of a much larger problem, including but not limited to the following: the use of force against inmates, particularly those suffering from mental illness, the unjustified and overuse of punitive segregation, inadequate medical attention, as was just evidenced by the deaths of 2 individuals, and a motion that unfortunately tabled the public discussion, and retaliation. Under the New York City Charter, the Board of Correction is the body charged with establishing minimum standards of care at Department of Corrections facilities. with evaluating compliance with those standards and for hearing grievances concerning violations of those standards. The board has been given the power of full access to the departmental records and facilities. It has been given the power to inspect the books of the department. It has been given power to subpoena witnesses and to introduce legislation. By letter dated August 18th of this year, I requested a copy of all written policies and procedures the board uses to investigate the use of force by correction officers against inmates, to investigate staff responses to health emergencies, and to investigate accusations of retaliation. As of today's date, the Office of Public Advocate has received nothing. The board is also charged under the charter with submitting an annual report to the mayor, the city council, and the commissioner that details its findings related to prison conditions. In my letter of August 18th, I requested the production of any reports that have been issued pursuant to the charter. As of today, nothing. I can only conclude that in the past many years, this board has fallen short of its mandated duties. Instead, the Department of Justice, the New York Times, has been the department's watchdogs. I hope and expect with 3 new board members, you will develop stronger standards, transparent procedures for ensuring compliance of those standards, and that you regularly document your findings as you are charged with doing under the charter. And I would hope that you would report those findings to my office as we continue to monitor this agency consistent with our responsibilities under the charter. And our office will continue to be open to respond to the many complaints that we have received from family members. And I thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Public Advocate James. So our first speaker will be, our second speaker will be Sarah Kerr with Legal Aid, and we have 16 people that are speaking. We also have executive session. So Ms. Masters, so it's important the speaker focus our attention. She will say when there's 1 minute, when there's 2 minutes left, 1 minute, because we need.
The Prisoners' Rights Project of the Legal Aid Society, and I thank you for this opportunity to make a statement. We are relieved that the BOC did not vote today on DOC's request as though they were appropriate as a variance, a request for variance. However, that all the work and consultation of Dr. Cohen's and Judge Hamill's committees on rulemaking is now set aside for the acceptance of DOC's ill-conceived request to implement new, highly restrictive housing as a proposed rule is disheartening. It is especially disheartening now that I know that how closely Kathy Puckett was also working with you. It is unfortunate that the proposed rule is now part of the resolution of this board. The appearance is nothing less than the city's independent jail oversight agency, the Board of Correction, participating and permitting the DOC to continue with business as usual. The proposed rule fails to include even the most obvious protections for individuals with mental illness, lacking any exclusion from the ESH or even from the harsher punitive segregation. The proposed ESH must not be implemented without addressing the underlying problems plaguing our city jails. Recent months have provided massive evidence of dereliction and incompetency by DOC staff in our jails. The DOJ report has been cited. The investigation division just recently was able to enter multiple jail facilities with large amounts of narcotics and a weapon undetected. The DOJ report on the treatment of young people chillingly detailed a culture within DOC of brutality, criminality, malfeasance, and lack of integrity, resulting in pain, injury, fear, and unwarranted use of punitive segregation against children. The DOJ acknowledged, and we know, that the facts they found in their investigation of youth in the city jails is also true for incarcerated adults. These grave concerns about inhumane incarceration practices echo concerns of medical and legal experts, countless advocates, including the New York City Jails Action Coalition members, members of New York City Council, and my office of the Legal Aid Society, which is currently litigating a system-wide lawsuit about brutality within DOC. I came to the people...
1 minute left.
I came to the Prisoners' Rights Project in 1994. We have always had a lawsuit about brutality. Yet, the DOC response to the dereliction of its staff, illustrated by the proposal of the highly restrictive ESH, was to take more things from individuals incarcerated in our city jails. The CAPA process must have better results than this and must be a real process. The board's CAPA proceedings must not be rushed, as this proposal, distributed last night after business hours, suggests is the plan. The CAPA proceedings must be more than a perfunctory process designed to rubber stamp DOC's wish list. And rather, the rulemaking process must include the sharing of factual information to ensure that the debate is robust, rational, based in fact, and aimed at implementing reforms that will create safe and humane city jails. The board must listen to the community and to stakeholders, and it must deliberate both on these proposals and on the alternatives that have been proposed by the New York Sale Jails Action Coalition and those that may have been developed in the board committees chaired by Dr. Cohen and Judge Hamlin.
Time. Thank you.
Thank you.
I really question the message that's being sent by this board by fast-tracking this restricted housing unit, which will take away rights, rights which have been in place for many years. And some of these rights are not even rights that are denied to people in punitive segregation, while at the same time dragging its feet on protecting people in isolation. The problems of people in isolation have been before this board for years. Dr. Cohen has repeatedly gone to the solitary confinement units and raised this with the board. More than a year and a half ago, the Jails Action Coalition made a proposal, and since then, since Judge Hamill joined the board, she has also been going and seeing the conditions and seeing how people are being tortured, spending weeks and weeks, and some people even years, in solitary confinement in the city jails. The board seemed to be committed to changing that, and yet nothing has happened about that. Instead, less than a month after the Department of Correction proposed these restrictive housing units, the board has immediately seized on that, and new members who are attending a board member meeting for the first time have agreed to move forward on that. We strongly believe that the board needs to move forward on the Jails Action Coalition proposal, which has been something that's been considered, and there's no reason that that can't happen right along with the CAPA process. A punitive approach does not work. That has been shown over the years. And what is the Department of Correction doing? The mayor obviously cared about solitary confinement by bringing in Commissioner Pont, who had made changes in Maine, and is not doing that here. Instead, we have more restrictions. I hope that this board will carefully consider the facts as they're being proposed by Department of Correction. They told you that this new lock-in would actually, changing lock-in time from 11 to 9 at night would actually reduce violent incidents, but if you look at their numbers for slashings and stabbings, actually there were 9 in September and 9 in October with the new lock-in rules, compared with 7 and 6 last year. So that's not going down, and if you look at the rest of the report, you'll see that's true. DOC claims that contraband comes in through visitors. Department of Investigation has shown that's not true. DOC claims that the source of violence is young people and people with mental illness. The Department of Justice and the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene's reports shows that that's also not true, that the source of violence is actually the correction officers themselves who are engaging in excessive uses of force. So we need an independent board that will ask questions, that will collect evidence, that will implement rules that are based on best practices, and that will hold Department of Correction accountable for following those rules. And we ask that because you're going to commence this CAPA process, we ask that you do it thoughtfully, allowing plenty of time for public comment. There was at some point a statement made that this would be at the end of December. I think you can tell that there are a lot of people.
Last time you had 8 minutes. We gave you, this time is over. The next speaker is...
It should not be done in December.
The next speaker is Cindy Schwartzbaum, who is Assistant Deputy Warden and the Executive Director of the Deputy Wardens Association.
morning, Chairman Campbell and board members. My name is Sidney Schwartzbaum. I've been the president of the Assistant Deputy Wardens Association for the last 18 years, representing both wardens level 1 and 2 within the Department of Correction. During my 36-year career, I have observed the renowned Correction Department adage of care, custody, and control deteriorate to confusion, chaos, and crisis over the last few years. I am here today to support Commissioner Pont and his executive staff of the department in their endeavors to bring about change and to institute the Enhanced Supervision Housing Unit to help curtail the large increases of violence which plague our jails. The newly created housing is necessary to address the ever-increasing violence undertaken by a select group of predators, gang members, and shot callers. Those inmates who order violence by mandating the subordinate gangs to do their dirty work. On an ongoing basis, dangerous inmates who leave punitive segregation, which Commissioner Pont has judiciously agreed to reduce from 90 to 30 days, they're released back into our general population only to continue their acts of violence. This vicious cycle must end if we as an agency are tasked with making the jail safer for staff and inmates alike. SRG is the acronym for Security Risk Groups. Most of these inmates belong to street gangs, such as Blood and Crips. It is noteworthy that 85% of the attacks with weapons, stabbings, and slashings are perpetrated by gang members in a show of solidarity for their gangs and retribution for disloyalty for not belonging to gangs. What is even more remarkable is that only 15% of our entire inmate population commit infractions of the rules during their incarceration. 85% of our inmates just want to do their time and go home to their families. It is this small percentage that the department needs to control and closely monitor all of their activities in an effort to minimize their influence throughout the agency. If the Department of Correction is going to reduce the sentence of punitive segregation for our most violent rule breakers, we need an alternative controlled area once these violent offenders are released from segregation. Enhanced supervision housing accomplishes that goal. I have stood up here and listened to people vilify the men and women of the Corrections Department, and it's so unfair. We come to work every day, we're doing yeoman's work. All we want to do is protect the inmates, and we do have people who violate the rules. But you know what? They're being punished, they're being disciplined. I have not heard one person come up here and mention ever, even the Board of Correction, when a correction captain on videotape gets his butt kicked and brutally beat by 3 or 4 people. If you're going to criticize us when we do wrong, why don't you criticize the violent predators who are preying upon other inmates and us? We deserve the respect and not to be called guards.
Thank you, sir. The next speaker is the president of the Correctional Captains Association, Patrick, and I'm afraid to pronounce it well. Thank you. You have 3 minutes.
First and foremost, I'm here to support Commissioner Pont and his executive team 100%. Commissioner Pont, we give you a vote of confidence, and we believe that you will succeed in what you intend to do with the Department of Corrections. I believe that the sentiments also go to my fellow union leaders. Sidney's right when he says that we are looked at as these people that come into the facilities and brutalize inmates on a daily basis. The fact of the matter is, there's no correction officer or above that wakes up in the morning and says to his wife and his family, I'm going to work today to brutalize an inmate. They say, I'm going to work today and hopefully I'll come home safe. And I'll get my 8 or my 16 hours in, and I'll take care of the inmates that are under my control in custody. And that's what they do each and every day. If you walk in the facilities, like I have for the past 33 years, you know that 99 9/10 of the correction officers and above that work in the facilities service the inmates and help the inmates on their daily routine in the prisons. It is appalling to have people come up here and call us jail guards and to suggest that we brutalize inmates. Yes, there's that one fraction of a percentage of people that think that's okay to do, but we don't condone it. And when they do it, they're disciplined and most times terminated from the department. You know, it's so funny to think about how just a short while ago, and members of this board will remember that there were agencies from all over this country visiting the New York City Department of Corrections because we were a role model.
1 minute.
We were a role model for Department of Corrections throughout the United States, and all of a sudden, we're not. Well, I don't see how that happened under this board's watch, quite frankly, if that's the case. Okay, so you have certainly failed in your job. Okay. Secondly, I thought that the Board of Corrections was an agency that was supposed to be pro-inmate and also pro-officer to reach common goals to make the jails work. But you've displayed today that you are anti-officer and pro-inmate. Well, I urge you to put a uniform on, Your Honor, and work in CPSU and have your... Thank you.
Our next speaker is Norman Seabrook, the president of the Correctional Officers Benevolent Association, COVID.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Norman Seabrook. I'm the president of the New York City Correctional Officers Benevolent Association and have been for the past 20 years. It's very disheartening when you hear the public advocate and others stand here and criticize the work of the men and women of the Department of Correction. When Joseph Pond first came to New York, I was not pleased with the assignment that was given to him by the mayor of the city of New York. However, I have not accepted that fact that he is receptive to change, to make the necessary changes that we can move forward in the Department of Corrections so that we are not criticized as much as others continue to criticize us. As a person that lives in the Bronx, I see the young men and women that are in jails. I talk to the 16 and 17-year-olds. And I have suggested on more than one occasion that you give these kids something to do. I do not think a child that's 16 or 17-year-old should be put in punitive segregation for smoking a cigarette. But the 17 or 18-year-old that punches out the eye of a correction officer needs to be put somewhere. The young man that takes a razor blade and gives another inmate 300 stitches needs to be put somewhere. He doesn't need a timeout. He doesn't need to be put back in population. So I support the commissioner and what he's trying to do. But what I do not support is the Board of Corrections, some members, not all, some members criticizing, and they have not walked in our shoes. They have not stood up to the fight. They have not went and talked to correction officers that face these dangers every day. And I understand the different groups, the Legal Aid Society, and all these different people. Take the inmates out of Rikers. Well, by a show of hands, what neighborhood do you want that jail built in, and do you feel like living next door to them? And I'm with that. You can move them wherever you want, but put them in your neighborhood. Stop putting them in the South Bronx. Stop putting them dead in Brooklyn somewhere among the communities in which they come. Do something for a change. Work with us to make this a better agency as opposed to continuously criticizing us. So Joe, if I've never said it 100 times, I've never said it once. I got your back, brother. We'll do what we got to do. And if those that don't want to participate, you can't help everybody. God is good. We're going to do what we got to do, so we'll go forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Liz Vegas. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing the name right, from the Jails Action Coalition. Oh, Mayes, I apologize.
No, I wrote it there. Today I'd like to speak about these new suggestions which seem, or directives, which I can point to a couple that particularly disturb me. Given that there are 7 areas in which the new directives submitted by the Department of Corrections should be considered punitive, we are hopeful that there will be a full opportunity for the public to be heard on these issues. For example, under policy, the new directives state that the Department of Corrections shall not use enhanced segregated housing as a punitive segregation unit. I submit that the ESH includes a striking number of punitive features. One of the most punitive directives concerns lockout time, which is described as a minimum of 7 hours of lockout time. The minimum differs sharply from the time outside required for the general population, which is 14 hours, according to Section 1-05 of the minimum standards. Also, the visiting restrictions, which demand no contact with visitors, is distressing. There is no such rule for the general population. Does not touching loved ones help in rehabilitating incarcerated individuals? I doubt it. This board, which oversees the Department of Corrections, is charged with assuring that the department conforms with the minimum standards created in 1978. It is essential
1 minute.
that an advance notice, widely distributed, and a public hearing precede a vote on such significant changes. And I'm hopeful that this new way of approaching it will do just that, but I doubt it. Thank you.
My name is Elena Landricina. I'm a staff attorney at Disability Rights New York, which is New York's designated protection and advocacy system. We have federal and state authority to ensure the protection of people with disabilities who are in facilities, including jails and prisons. We're greatly concerned about the lack of transparency with the board's work, and we also have substantive concerns about the expansion of indefinite solitary confinement through the creation of the enhanced supervision housing unit, as well as the complete lack of any explanation about how mental health services are going to be provided in this unit. So with respect to the board's discussion today, we found out very late last night about the new proposed rule. We think it's fundamentally contrary to the principles of transparency and effective government oversight to post on the website and not distribute it through email that the board is considering a completely new agenda for today. With respect to the substantive concerns that we have, we're just as concerned as we were last Monday when we submitted comments to the Board of Correction about enhanced supervision housing. There's particular concern about the lack of any exclusion for people with mental illness or other disabilities, people who need supports and access to services, and even in the latest rendition of the proposal, there's no real discussion about how these services are going to be provided, how people, since we know over the last several years that people continue to die in isolation when they're denied access to services, how this can be omitted from any discussion, and the board will move forward on this is very concerning. So while we agree that reforms that are targeted to reducing violence at Rikers Island have to be a priority. It should be a priority.
1 minute.
Because of the significant population of individuals that we are concerned about, which are people with disabilities. They continue to be subject to abuse and neglect. These reforms that are targeted towards violence can't be at the expense of the health and safety of vulnerable individuals.
Thank you.
My name is Skylar Albertson. I'm here today representing the Bronx Defenders. I want to start out by echoing concerns voiced by Dr. Cohen about the total lack of meaningful programming and services in punitive segregation. For the vast majority of the clients of the Bronx Defenders, I've personally interviewed in solitary confinement units at Rikers and various facilities. There's been absolutely zero meaningful services. And so at this point in time, there's really no reason to believe that anything would be different in ESH. I'd also like to address the notion that 90 days is currently the maximum amount of time someone can be placed in punitive segregation. That's merely the maximum amount of time you can get for one ticket. People are usually given more than one ticket. And so in 59 interviews conducted over a 12-month period from the summer of 2013, through this past August, the median amount of days that those 59 individuals were placed in punitive segregation consecutively was 90 days, not the max, the median. So the Bronx Defenders has submitted a list of concerns to the Board of Correction, which I trust the board members have read. I want to narrow my comments today to the total lack of due process afforded to individuals who are going to be placed in punitive segregation and potentially in the future being placed in ESH. The way that these hearings go, the department will tell you that there is an independent and impartial hearing officer, but that officer is a correction officer employed by the Department of Correction. There's no amount of specialized training that can overcome that inherent conflict of interest to have a correction officer as the sole person in the room with an incarcerated person for a hearing. There's the only two people in the room for those hearings generally is an incarcerated person and a correction officer. There are rights to witnesses, rights to evidence, but these are routinely denied in large part because of the structure of these hearings. There's an appeals process that is very rarely explained to incarcerated people, and they very rarely are able to pursue it in time. There's then an Article 78 process, and that is so long and cumbersome that issues are often moot by the time they're entertained, and it's just largely an ineffective and slow process. So the specific point I'd like to press upon everyone here today is that for any placement of any individual in any type of restricted housing, there needs to be outside independent advocates representing incarcerated people. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Luz Rivera, Department of Correction.
I just want to say one thing, and well, a few things. I work in the fire safety unit, and I respond to many fire alarms, fire cells. And in doing so, I see correction officers being insulted, throwing feces, urine, spit on, and I have not heard anybody here from Board of Correction address that issue. I know that we're here to be impartial, and I would like to ask the Board of Correction, the board, to please take that into consideration when coming together to resolve a problem, because we're here in it together. We have to be impartial to make sure that the program does work. Please take that into consideration. Work with us. We do a great job. We want to go home the same way we come to work. Okay? A lot of people are getting assaulted. Not only inmates. Inmates get assaulted by inmates also. But we get assaulted by inmates. We get spit on. We get kicked. We get cut. It hurt me so much to walk into an alarm and see an officer soaking wet with feces, urine, and yet that officer is standing there holding that post because he's a correction officer, because he's doing his job or her job. Yet, go home and come back the next day to do the same thing over and over again. So please, let's work together and be impartial. We have to do this together. We can't just view the inmate, view the officer that's doing the job as well. Please work with us. Thank you.
Thomas from Department of Correction.
Good morning all. I'm Officer Thomas. I'm a correction officer. I just wanted to say that January 7, 2014, I was assaulted by an inmate. I know when people hear, oh, you're a correction officer in New York City, that you signed up for that, and that's not what I signed up for. I also signed up for care, custody, and control, and I also signed up to assist with my fellow officers with rehabilitating these inmates. When I was assaulted, the inmate stated, I'm getting a little teary-eyed. He stated, go ahead, press charges. I'll just tell these mother effers that I hear voices and that I'm going to hang up, and I'll just walk out of here. Sure enough, he walked out. He didn't get no extra charges brought up on. And I say that to say that these inmates are fully aware that there is no consequences to their actions. And they are stating constantly that they're going to continue to abuse us. They're going to continue to use the city for their money because they know that the law is on their side. I'm not going to take them 2 minutes. Like I said, I'm getting a little teary-eyed. So I just want to say that correctional officers every day, they go into these jails and they are constantly being abused. And not all inmates are bad. I want to state that. Not all inmates are bad. Not all inmates come there with intentions on hurting other officers, but there are inmates that come here and they're looking for what they say, quote unquote, a come up with New York City's money. So I just want, you know, others to take a look at that and further investigate the situation instead of just saying, oh, this officer should have remained professional at all times. Because if an officer is being attacked and I'm just sitting in a chair and the inmate is coming at me, just grabbing me because he's mad at another inmate, I did not sign up for that. So with that being said, they are very aware that there is no consequences to their actions, and they will continue to attack the officers and mental health civilian staff as well. Have a good day.
Thank you, Ms. Thomas. Our next speaker is Shira Daniels.
My name is Shira Daniels, and I'm a correctional officer for New York City. New York City Department of Corrections. On November 30th, 2013, I did not go home the same way I came into work. I was assaulted by an inmate who fractured my left orbital. The flyer that Elias gave out is my picture. This is me. I did not go home the same way I came to work. It took a lot out of me. This is not what I signed up for, and I would like for stuff to be happening to the inmates.
Take your time. It's okay. Speak from your heart.
It just hurts because I suffer from migraines now. I lost vision in my left orbital, and I'm only 23 years old, and it's just a lot.
But you go to work every day.
Exactly. Get up every morning, put the uniform on, and try and put it behind me, but I can't because I still work with it.
Keep going.
I would like for y'all to understand that it's not an easy job. You put on a uniform, you probably won't go home the same way.
It's good.
Thank you, Mr. Daniels. Department of Corrections.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Angel Castro. I've worked in CPSU, which is often discussed in this room this morning. That you keep me and my co-workers in mind, that we do deserve a safe environment along with the inmates. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Castro. Our next speaker is Elias.
Not to take up much of your time, there's a couple of things I would like to point out that everybody in this room probably already know. According to the Department of Corrections, the last 5 years, fiscal years, there have been 317 stabbing and slashings. Those are not correctional officers involved with inmates. Those are the inmates stabbing and slashing each other. According to their statistics, 3,317 assaults on correctional officers in the last 5 years. 116 assaults against medical staff, 7 assaults on DOC civilian staff, 8 assaults on other civilian staff. The other thing that they pointed out that I would like for the board to really pay attention to, especially Dr. Cohen, is they've determined that only 15% of the inmates in our custody is responsible for the statistics that I just gave you. 15% of the 12,000 inmates that we have is responsible for these statistics. The other thing that they pointed out is that 85% of the inmates who participate in stabbing and slashings are actually gang members. Now, the only thing that I'm saying to you is help us, protect all of us. This is not just about inmates. There are members of this board who never, ever, ever speak up for correctional officers. And when I read your charter, I'm confused because according to your charter, you're supposed to be responsible for me, for Officer Daniels, that got her ovary broken by an inmate, and all she did was open the door to lock him out. Some of you never, ever expressed any concern about us, and that's bad. Because those of us who break the rules, we get suspended, terminated, suspended without pay. Some of us are doing time. So when we do wrong, we pay. What we're asking you is, when these inmates that are committing the crimes do wrong, they should pay too. And they should not be able to hide behind the label of being mentally ill. They should not. The inmate that assaulted both these officers are mentally ill. Or excuse me, that's the classification that they have. There's nothing mentally ill about them. So in the end, all we're asking for is a fair shot. And at the end of the day, like we said on the flyer, all we're saying is, Board of Correction, bottom line, protect all of us. Inmates, civilians, and correctional officers.
Thank you.
Good job.
And our last speaker is Terry Hubbard, Jail Action Coalition.
I'm here not only to speak about the inhumane conditions of our jails. That's not what I'm only here for. I'm here because I am the advocate of the thousands of young people and older people, all the inmates on Rikers Island with mental illness. Sometimes the punishment does not fit the crime, and the crime does not fit the punishment. I agree with Mr. Schwartzbaum on what needs to be taken and what needs to be done. The heinous conditions, the gang violence, especially in our houses of OBCC, where they have been ranked the hell house. I speak to many officers, former correction officers, as well as NYPD, on the heinous brutality that's now stage 4 cancer. I'm a cancer survivor, and let me tell you, when stage 4 cancer begins, there's no hope left. There's no sanctity in it. But I'm not only here to represent those with mental illness, but I want to let Commissioner Pont know that you are appreciated and you are needed, as well as Dr. Ventures, who is not here. I'm not only the liaison for the mentally ill on Rikers Island, I am a civilian and a parent of an inmate on Rikers. I am also the new appointed liaison of the Officers Against Brutality on Rikers Island. A lot of these men and women do not come to work to be brutalized and mentored and tormented. But there are the chosen few that are the cancer to the Bureau. And just like cancer, it must be cut out. It not only, we don't need radiation, or we don't need a chemo. It just needs to be cut out blatantly. I was chosen to lead the correction officers of Rikers. I've been there for 8 years. They know me on a first name basis. I come across Rikers Island 6 o'clock in the morning. I eat breakfast with the officers. I even get there before the MTA. I get on Accessorate, I'm there before the roosters crow. I come to let you know that the officers have appointed me RNDC, AMKC, GMDC, GRVC, Rose, and OBCC. These are the officers who have never been given a chance to speak. These are the officers that do not believe in brutality. These are the officers that have spent 10 and 12 years without being appointed.
1 minute.
I stand before you, Commissioner Pont, to please make time for us to say what needs to be done in Rikers Island, because you have the officers that have not created any infractions, that want to help out with the inmates with mental illness. And I stand before you as their new appointed liaison.
Thank you. So that concludes our public forum, and I want to thank everyone for their attendance today. And the proposed rule will be in the city record, as we stated, any number of times. We would welcome written comments. In addition, there will be a public hearing. The board now is going into an executive session to discuss 2 recent in-custody deaths, legal issues, and a personal matter. And I would entertain a motion to adjourn. Second. All in favor of adjournment? The meeting's adjourned.